Prime Minister's remark. The purpose of this workshop this morning is basically to inform our partners on the thinking or plans that the government has towards the recovery strategy for COVID-19 and TCRO. So if you look to the agenda, we'll need to go through this morning and then allow a Q&A, and then we will move on. So we already have a tea break, so there will not be a coffee break. But we will, after our discussions, we will go straight to lunch. Just quickly, our housekeeping matters. We also have our colleagues or our partners from overseas who are live. You talk, you use the mic, and in that way they can also hear you when you talk. But without further ado, before we move on to our first presentations, Excellencies, let me take this opportunity on behalf of the governments to thank all our partners, you around the tables, who have responded to TCRO and COVID-19. On behalf of the governments, we would like to express our utmost and sincere appreciations to you all for supporting the government and helping the government respond to the two disasters that we are currently going through, TCRO and COVID-19. So thank you, job, an excellent job. Give a round of applause of ourselves for the works that we are doing to respond to the TCRO and COVID-19. So thank you all our partners for that. So we will move straight to our first presentations. If you see from your agenda, this morning we should have two presentations before coffee break. But I'm advised that the presentations on the recovery budget process will not happen will remove from the list. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done on that before we actually passing the information to our partners. So probably you will be informed through our bilateral meetings about these processes. But what we will have this morning is basically a presentation of policy priorities, and then we allow a Q&A, and then we move to a presentation on TCRO and COVID-19 PDNA findings, and TCRO COVID-19 recovery strategy, and then we allow time for Q&A. And after that, we'll have a closing remarks from Director General, and then we'll break for lunch. Thank you. So without further ado, we'll now give to Director the 2021 government priority areas.
Thank you, Thomas Titsi. Thank you, everyone. Let me just join Titsi to express my sincere appreciation to everyone around the table for being a very good partner. I know it's a difficult time for us. We were under a lot of pressure trying to deliver on the expectations of the people of Vanuatu. The issues around the COVID have limited our place ourselves on resource limitation, but amidst that, we would like to express our sincere appreciation for the partners that we have in country who are able to help us to be able to prepare so that this meeting can be convened this morning. And I would like to say thank you very much for the support in terms of that support. Without further ado, let's move directly to the presentation this morning. And I'm sure that some of you in your respective plannings might have come across the 2021 government priorities. Because I think when it was obviously endorsed by the Council of Ministers, we would have sent it out to help you in your planning. So I'm sure that what I will be presenting this morning will not be a new thing for you. Also given that most of the priorities, as we mentioned, there was no major shift in the goalpost. So we would maintain most of the things that are in the previous year's priorities, but there are new areas of emphasis, and I think you are aware of that. So there will be elements in the priorities, maybe the targets that will change, but the whole theme of the priority is, government priority is maintained. The areas of the targets that we look at under its priority might be put a little bit more emphasis on. And given you follow that discussion because of the recent disaster that we have, DC Harold and DC Harold and COVID-19, and so those influence some shift, not in the goalposts, but in the areas that we, the target areas. Sorry. Battery flat now. The government priorities that was recently approved by the Council of Ministers, there were 7 areas of priorities you might be aware of. And the priorities are aligned with the pillars, if you like, that we have in the National Sustainable Development Plan. There is nothing new. Everything comes in alignment to this national document, as we are all aware of. Priority area number 1 is to do with the enhancing of business opportunities and investment environment. Under that priority, we have a few areas of target areas. We frame the priorities around those targets: boosting primary production, strengthening agricultural value chain, expanding the service sector, infrastructure, equipment, with focus more on regulation. That is basically what priority area or priority number 1 entails under the government priorities for 2021. Then we move on to priority number 2, which is aligned to the economic pillar 2, improve infrastructure. And so the priority number 2 is improve resilient infrastructure. And I think that's an important priority for the government of Vanuatu, given that the visit of disasters and our program, the government program, its effort is in strengthening government or resilience in government efforts and government programs. So under that, we have a target area to look at improving airport infrastructure. You have the rehabilitation of improved maintenance of high priority in rural areas. We expand the access and reduce cost of telecommunication and energy, and I think that's an important one as well. We move on to priority area number 3, which deals mainly with improving education quality, accessibility and training outcomes for children and young people. That is perfectly aligned with the social number 2 under quality education. So the target areas that we looked at would be expanding greater access to education, improving the quality of education, increase higher education opportunities, as well as improving opportunities for employability and entrepreneurial skills development. And most of that also we have, we stressed this in the recent document that we have, the National Human Resource Development Plan, which captures some of the gaps that we have in the our national education system. Priority area number 4 is to do with the improved quality health care, and that's also aligned to NSDP pillar social 3, quality health care. And under that, we have specified these various targets. Number one is improving the capacity and address COVID-19. That's a new area of emphasis. And long-term recovery of TC Harold. These are the areas of emphasis that I'm talking about. Secondly, incidence of communicable diseases and non-communicable diseases. Third one on the list is the strengthening of health service management and information system, and I think that's also important. Next is the strengthening health service management and information system. I think there's a repetition of that. Implementing the role of de-alienation policy. Then the last one that we have under that is the exploring opportunities of conducting personal health profile system. That's one of the new areas that I think we have added to these target areas. Then we look at what priority 5 is dealing with. We have improved delivery that again comes under social 6, a strong, effective institution. That is also an important area, and I think because most of the things that we'll be discussing here this morning depends very much on the strength of the institutions that will be moving forward and implementing the priorities that we have. So that is to improve service delivery. The targets that we have here, and I think I'm having issue with this. Can I have some IT assistance? Oh, there's a... Thanks, Nikki. The target areas, we have enhanced implementation of decentralization policies. The second one on that list there is the improving urban management, as well as increasing labor mobility nationally and internationally. And we're also looking at strengthening the capacity to manage growing external relations. And I think that's important also for us. Enhance partnership with donor community-based organization and non-organizational and non-governmental organization. That is to do with strengthening our machinery, coordination between ourselves so that we can effectively deliver on the government priorities. Strengthening public institution at the head of the executive. Priority area number 6, which is aligned to pillar 3 and 4 of the climate and environment, pillar 3 and 4. We have these targets under this priority, which is to do with the improving climate change, adaptation, disaster risk management, governance. We also look at increasing equitable access and affordable water supply and sanitation. We also identify the need to strengthen institution governance that protect our environment and natural resources. We also look at strengthening, increasing resilience in the productive sector, which is a very important area, given that there has been a big shift in terms of the priority for after the 2 disasters. The government has placed more emphasis in the productive sector, so that is important. Improving water management, strengthening the enforcement of environmental impact assessment. That's all to do with priority area number 6. Then finally, we have priority number 7, which is again to do with the social pillar of the NSDP, and it's social inclusion, security, peace, and justice. I think we all agree that everything, the success of everything that we have or we discuss, we wanted to do, cannot operate in isolation of an environment where there is security, peace, and justice. And so that's a very important priority for the government. Improving national security service is one of our target area. Implementing gender responsiveness, planning, budgeting process, that is also another area where we need a little bit more focus to improve that. We also look at promoting traditional governance, Christian principles for a peaceful society. Finally, establishing anti-corruption institution is one of the targeted areas where we want to strengthen. Having discussed or taking you through those priorities, this is an indication of how resources have been allocated towards each of these priorities. So if you follow closely the chart previously, you would notice that the changes in the chart reflect shift or reflect emphasis in the government priority areas. And so with the 7 priorities, that is the allocation of the resource allocation guide, we expect that there would be a 20% allocation of resource towards priority outcome number 1, 15% to priority outcome number 2, and so forth, until you come to priority outcome number 7, social inclusion, security, and justice. The planning of government priorities, the resourcing of government resources is being framed around the current situation. As you all agree that COVID and TC Herald sort of poses a new normal pattern for us, and so the 2021 budget continued to put more emphasis in sustainable and inclusive economic recovery to enhance economic growth, as well as rising level of service delivery to improve well-being for all the people living in Vanuatu. That's an important statement because it doesn't say all indigenous Vanuatu, it says all people living in Vanuatu. In 2001, the government will continue to work collaboratively with its development partners, which is the emphasis of the Prime Minister's speech this morning, to fund government expenditure program and activities that were in line with 7 budget priorities, budget outcomes. And that brings us to the end of our short presentation this morning. We will have a copy of this presentation in case you would like to have a copy. We would be happy to provide a copy for yourselves. As I mentioned earlier, it will help you in your planning, but it also will help you in our discussion as we go further in discussing our priorities and how we strengthen our coordination mechanism to help assist our effort in delivering services to the people of Vanuatu. With that, I'd like to thank you all for your attention, and I'll give it back to Titsi.
Thank you very much, Director Despak. This, in a way, it's like a refresher. I'm sure a lot of us have seen the copies of these policy priorities, and it's a straightforward presentations. But if anyone has one pending questions or queries, we will now open the floor and see if there is any things that you want to seek clarifications on. Otherwise, my view is that it's a straightforward presentations, just for refreshing your mind and also help those who haven't seen the copy of these policy priorities to be aware of what is the current government policy priorities now. Thank you. If you have any pending question or two you want to ask, we will allow we will give you opportunity. Otherwise, we can move straight to the second presentation, which is what many of us are looking forward to. Is there, suppose you got any quick questions or comments? All good, huh? Silence, you mean PC. Oh yes, Richard, please. There's a mic behind you.
Thank you very much, excuse me, for the presentation. Just one question. When looking at the percentages, given the discussion around ensuring COVID stays out and strengthening the health system, can you give us any feedback or analysis on the shifts between the different areas in the allocation of fiscal space? From last year, I'm just interested to know around. I see that, healthcare is at 15%, improved business opportunities at 20%. Has there been a significant shift from last year, given the place we find ourselves in with COVID and TC Herald? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. That's a good question.
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned earlier, that the shift in the allocation was mainly prompted by the effects of the disaster that we have. And so, given the situation of the disaster, we have government emphasis on some of the priority areas, but John, would you like to give a little bit more clarification on how the percentage have been shifted from what it was previously? But they are mainly based on the emphasis that the government places on certain areas, given the situation that we are currently going through. John.
Sorry, I think one. The presentation which you are seeing right up there is being allocated following the priority emphasis of the government and the situations we currently have. We have COVID-19 and then DC Haron, and I think most of our and that's why more of us need to be on health sector and also the broad sector. So I think that there isn't any feasibility studies as you, but I think the application is based on to see the sources allocated to. Thank you. And I think finance representative is here. Director, if he can also be given an opportunity to say a few words on that.
Okay, I'm just indicating if the colleagues from Ministry of Finance would like to say anything to that. But I think there is one thing. This meeting, but we would like to have a technical discussion. So maybe when we convene the technical discussions, we can come back more on how. But definitely, what John has mentioned is that I think with the standard of health facilities that we have, there is government emphasis on improving health facilities to be able to deal with the issues of health. I see hand from here. Can you, the mic? Sorry.
Yes, Nancy.
Thank you very much, DG Gregoire and Chair. Thank you, Thomas, Director of Presentation Blue. Me appreciate them presentation where you give him. I think, me appreciate them say all percentages I show all priorities we government ikat na ya. I think by helpful small mi felas bosi kat one benchmark some bench line where you miss have a look increases where you start. Mi sure say also lo healthier 15%, hemi 15% of budget we stop after overall after increase we government mi saluk look lo mi kutumo budget inside lehem. Be mi glad lo look say by got more support to go inside to strengthen them donor coordination with them all development partners play me. Heme me very important. I think Vila all development partners only play one important role blow help them government blow pifima budget play him. So blow help them Vila have prepare properly blow assisting government by me appreciate them plan this for say you make out more information around all priorities here, and by helping Vila to blow Vila have meaningfully come around the table blow give him some contribution. But having said that, me want them congratulate them all staff. Me say me one hard time, and obviously Prime Minister make them good work. Blow you bless have organize a meeting here. Me want them appreciate them on behalf of Asian Development Bank. Say you bless have pulu me Vila together. Blow you miss have look all priorities block government we bless me all development partners service support. So me wish him well and continue the conversation, but me look forward to all technical discussion, and by me interest planted below have contribute inside all discussions here. Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you, Nancy. Yes. In a nutshell, I mean, yeah, there's actually increases in the way they've been allocated the physical space. I think last year, for example, for the productive sector or priorities number 1, we have allocated 10%, I think, and now it's increasing to 20%. But I think, like Director said, when we come to the technical discussions, we will flesh out, how we work out the physical spaces. But like John and Director said, I mean, we follow the government priorities of the day. Like if they put more emphasis on infrastructure, so we shift the space accordingly, and so that's how it's been allocated. But it would be more proper if we have a good analysis, and then we will present it to our partners this morning. But we take note of that, and I'm sure when we come to our technical discussions, we can further discuss how we can improve the analysis behind it. Like I've said, I mean, we don't need to dwell very much on this. It's just like a refresher. Inform us, all of us around the table, about the government priorities for 2021. If there is no further comments or questions, we will proceed straight to our second presentations. And that's the presentation for TCR role COVID-19 PDNA findings. So I must, before I invite Malcolm to come and do the presentations, let me thank the partners who have supported us in putting together the PDNA. It is the first time that we local formulate the PDNA and prepare the PDNA. I think if you remember very well, during the TCPAMs, we have to flew in all the experts overseas to come and did the PDNA. But this time, we are using our local team resources that we have, with the support of our partners, especially like to single out the UNDP for the support that they have provided to us, and also other partners who I didn't mention their names, but they also contributed to shape the PDNA. So we will not, without further ado, I'll give it to Malcolm just to run through it. It's still towards the finalizations. Like I've said, is our first experience, and we are hoping that if there is another TCPAM or another Category 5 cyclones in the future, we will be able to tackle it, because we have a lot of experiences with TCR. Malcolm, thank you very much. Sorry, we'll mix up the order, so we'll present the strategy first, TCRO and COVID-19 recovery strategy, and then followed by the PDNA. And then after this, we'll open up the discussions and invite in Q&A.
Morning, morning everyone. Excellencies, High Commission, distinguished partners and heads of agencies. Very much pleased to present this, make this presentation, especially starting off with the National Recovery Strategy. We've got hard copies being circulated. Not much different from what we've circulated initially, apart from some updated figures, given that we've now got more inputs, feedback from sectors into this recovery strategy, which addresses COVID, TC Herald and COVID-19. Just in terms of context, where we've come from to where we're at. So basically in March we had WHO declaring the global pandemic with the coronavirus. End of March we had a state of emergency being declared, and then early April TC Herald made landfall, especially within the northern provinces of Vanuatu, Sadma, Malamba and Penama. Government, through the DESPAC, established the Recovery Operations Center to collaborate with sectors, as well as coordinate efforts in terms of collecting information, especially in terms of putting together this recovery strategy and the post-disaster needs assessment. So we had a recovery strategy draft, which was first circulated in June. COM then approved the draft in early July. Okay, in terms of what you'll see, what we're trying to highlight here is with the recovery strategy, we've got in terms of compounding disasters. So we've got TC Herald and then COVID-19, the sum of the impact, and then the individual sums of those particular disaster events. Not forgetting that there's also localized events like the Tana Ashfall, as well as I think the Teoma flash floods. So it's getting, the situation is getting more complex, especially in terms of dealing with a number of disasters in all fronts. This particular recovery strategy, the objectives is being that we recover, rebuild, and we emerge stronger. The recovery strategy begins with the needs of the people and ends with the needs of the people. I think we've got that message very clear by the Prime Minister this morning in terms of addressing the critical needs of the people. The process will be led by government, working collaboratively with all the partners here in the room. And as well, the importance that this particular recovery strategy provides, that bridge, that link between what we have in terms of crisis event, as well as to our National Sustainable Development Plan, so that we not only focus on the development aspirations, but we build back much stronger and better than before. Just a schematic of where this National Recovery Strategy will fit. We do have our development planning and budgeting processes, your budgets informing your plans, business plans, and your corporate strategies, policies. And then you have your National Recovery Strategy that will come in leading and informing, and as well as helping the government and sectors overall in terms of meeting the impacts of the intended impacts of the National Sustainable Development Plan. How government went about this whole PDNA exercise. In April, right after the TC Herald, you had the rapid technical assessment with sectors and clusters going out. And then from April to May, your detailed sectoral assessments. We were also fortunate to have, we sort of employed the services of the National Statistics Office, especially to carry out this NSTB baseline survey, a sub-sample, and then as well as draw on, from the months of April to June, draw on your other sector verified assessments in order to come to this post-disaster needs assessment. The whole exercise draws on the, and those of you who are familiar with the PDNA, or post-disaster needs assessment process, would have gone through this. But the main thing is being that it's a harmonized, coordinated approach led by government, and that draws on an assessment of recovery needs, your disaster effects, which basically it's your damage and losses, your disaster impacts, assessing your human and macroeconomic impacts, and then basically your baseline data, or what you have available. Now, when we refer to damage, basically it's more your physical assets, so your building units of roads, square kilometers of cropland, and losses is more the economic flows, either your reduction in revenue flows or increased expenditures in order to meet or manage disaster impacts and new risks coming up from your disasters. Oops. I think we've got, it's not coming out here, but basically what we're going to show is that overall the total effects is 60 billion Vanuatu. That equates to roughly 545 million USD. And that's 54% of the GDP. If you recall from TCPAM, we had, I think, 450 million US dollars in terms of effects. Now for TC Herald, given that we've also taken into account COVID, 9 million US dollars is COVID related. 6 million of that figure from that 10 million COVID related loss is related to private sector losses alone. Sorry about the glitch, but I think it should be in your hard copy. I'll call on, sorry, it's going to be a duet between myself and Jorge, my other Recovery Operations Center colleague. So he'll explain the tables and the graphs.
Thank you, Malcolm. Good morning. Just very quickly to talk about, we have like 4 divisions of sectors. We have the social, productive, infrastructure, and cross-cutting sectors. What we are seeing in the screen is the disaster effects, which is damages and losses. As we can see, for example, agriculture is the sector most affected after TC Harold and COVID, and this is mainly because of the path that we have seen of Harold, affecting mainly Santo and Pentecost, which are the main islands in terms of agricultural production. So we're considering this, for example, all the losses, not only for this year, all the losses in the long term, for example, for kava, cocoa, sandalwood. So these kind of losses are accounted in this 19 billion Vanuatu in there. So when we talk about 60 billion Vanuatu, it's not only about 1 year, we're talking about 60 billion Vanuatu in the long term. These damages and losses represent, as Malcolm said, 54% of the 2020 GDP. But we need to be clear that it's not a loss only for this year, it's across the long term. It can be like in the next 10, 15 years. Following the PDNA methodology, we have this division of 4 big groups of sectors: agriculture, then housing, private houses, are also very affected. We have, according to the estimates, more than 5,000 houses were completely destroyed. All this information is contained in the Vanuatu recovery strategy. And these are more or less the allocation. It's important to mention that these figures are still preliminary. We need to validate. We're waiting for the final validation from the sectors. And another clarification to make is that all these estimates were entirely done by the sectors. DESPAC, Recovery Operations Center, is only coordinating and compiling, but these come directly from the sectors, estimates, and the recovery needs. The total, this 60 billion batu, is not including environment and justice and community services. Because the estimates of these numbers are really big. If we talk about environment, we're talking about 1.4 trillion batu, because we are talking about tropical forest, mangroves, coral. So the environment losses are very big. If we include it here, it's just disproportionate. It's 96% of all these figures. So just for comparative purposes, we are not including these two. For justice and community services, we are talking, for example, the long-term effects on gender-based violence increase as a consequence of TC Harold, child protection, women empowerment, which have also like huge impacts in terms of the human development. This is not in here. The figures are included in the Vanuatu recovery strategy and also in the PDNA. Thank you.
And just to add that the losses I referred to with the private sector, that's only for I think April to June. So very, very conservative estimates, but like with COVID-19, it's the situation is evolving, it's complex. So that would require additional reviewing and looking at the figures. Now, in terms of recovery objectives, the strategy, if you note, is it's structured so that it reflects what's in the NSTP, the pillars, your social, economic, and environmental pillar. With recovery objective 1, basically to restore and strengthen essential social services and protections. Objective 2, more related to the economic pillar, to enhance lives and livelihoods. And then with objective 3, repair the national and belt environment. In total, there's 12 strategic priorities under those particular objectives. It's not showing out clearly here, but when we circulate the strategy, you'll have it more clearly in front of you. This gives you a breakdown on the actual values associated with the needs as per those 3 strategic objectives. In total, we're looking at a sum of 36 million USD. Sorry, that's in Vatu. 36.43 billion Vatu. That would roughly amount to 330 million USD. I'll leave it to Hoya with recovery to explain the recovery needs.
Thank you, Malcolm. So, in contrast with the previous slide that we were discussing just a minute ago, these are the recovery needs. Why is it different? Is like the direct question from the damages and losses. So, for example, let's stick with the agriculture example. We have in the slide before almost 19 billion batu. The recovery needs are not trying to give back the money lost to the farmers. It's about creating specific projects to incentivize and recover the sector. It's not to pay back the farmer the economic losses. It's about to create this kind of projects. So for agriculture, for example, the Ministry of Agriculture is budgeting 5 billion baht. Now, this doesn't mean that the government is requesting to donors 5 billion baht to the sector to recover. The previous presentation about budget policy priorities, we have for business 20% of the budget. So the government of Vanuatu is also committing towards achieving this 5 billion baht. So it's a mixed funding. For education, for example, we were talking about 7 billion baht for disaster assessment, damages and losses, and this, in this case, is 11 billion baht the recovery needs. Why is this higher? Basically because we're talking about build back better for infrastructure. So one thing is the market cost of the schools affected, and another thing is the reconstruction cost. So for some sectors, the recovery needs are lower. For some sectors, you need to incorporate these kind of concepts of build back better. The same occurs, for example, for health. 3 billion baht, mostly for reconstruction of health facilities. In this case, for example, we're including now environment and justice and community services. Before we said it's not included in the graph, in the total of the 60 billion baht, but the needs for these sectors, we are talking about 1 billion baht for environment and 2.3 billion baht for justice and community services. The total amount, as Malcolm said in the slide before, the recovery needs is 36 billion baht. That is the cost of the recovery for TC Herald and COVID-19.
Now, when it comes to coordination, excuse the organogram, you won't be able to see it clearly, but I think just to reiterate what the Prime Minister stated earlier, as well as the DG, in terms of having that coordinated through government, especially with DESPEC and the National Recovery Committee, which we've got up here, and as well as working with central agencies like finance, other sectors, and working with the structure set by Department of Local Authorities and the NDMO, going right down to the community, which is something that we'd like to see. Now, in terms of next steps, Hoy alluded to earlier, having to validate the PDNA findings by the sectors. We're looking towards mid next week to do that. And then there's donor discussions and funding negotiations. I think aid coordination is looking at a more technical round of discussions going forward. We have, accompanying this particular recovery strategy, project initiation guidelines. We're nutting out the details internally, as well as critical agencies like the Ministry of Finance, and then a monitoring framework to ensure we have value for money and we're delivering to the needs of the people. Thank you, Tomas. I think that ends the first part of the presentation with the National Recovery Strategy. Maybe we'll proceed to the second part of the presentation. It's more the actual findings as per the sectors. So I think I've gone through an overview of especially the National Recovery Strategy covers. We do have, my other colleagues gone off, but we do have, if you look, at the back, Volume A and the Volume B of the PDNA. And the Volume A is basically more the executive summary, covers the highlights, especially in terms of economic loss, the disaster effects, the macroeconomic impact, both TC Herald and COVID across the 14 sectors, and then a much more in-depth analysis with Volume B, which is more the longer version. And I've just gone through the National Recovery Strategy. As Ho alluded to, basically with the PDNA report, we've got, it groups those particular sectors as productive, social or infrastructure. So you have agriculture, commerce, industry, tourism under the productive sector. And then with social, it's basically housing, education, health, culture, infrastructure, where we have water and sanitation, public buildings, electricity, transport, telecommunications, and then cross-cutting the gender or the justice, community, services, environment, and your disaster risk reduction sector. Maybe I'll ask Mark if you can hold up those two. So we have volume A and volume B on the right. So that'll be circulated as well. It's still in draft. But we can say that the figures are pretty much updated, and we just need the validation of the sectors by which we've worked with. So PDNA process, as I've mentioned, each sector, what they've done, if you look at the report, basically a context analysis of what was there pre-disaster, and then the disaster effect, the impact, the recovery need, and then it's all feeding into the recovery strategy. Very much similar to what we've mentioned prior. This whole process is government-led. We tailor it to local circumstances. The fact that COVID-19 was upon the whole global community, that restricted the actual access to surge capacity. So we had to look within and rely upon whatever in-country technical support was in, as well as, I must say, a lot of appreciation to our sectors who have contributed and informed this particular PDNA as well as the recovery strategy. And as we've got in this last bullet point, that the government's commitment and performance was under never before experienced circumstances, but it's been a tremendous achievement thus far, especially with coming up with the assessment. Now it's going forward with the implementation of recovery priorities. In the report, basically that's just giving you a whole a breakdown of what the social sector, productive sector, infrastructure sector, and the cross-cutting sectors. And I've stated prior that the whole total effects, especially where damage and losses is concerned, is 545, 394 million US dollars. And Owe mentioned that the productive sector has recorded, or there's more in terms of substantial damage and loss figures. So we've got basically 52%, which is more the productive sector, with damage and losses. Social sector, this is 35%, and then your infrastructure sectors, in terms of your disaster effects with damage and losses. With housing sector, the findings that has come up is that there's approximately 80% of the houses were affected in the provinces. As of June, it's been recorded that we had over 6,000 displaced people, and then 18,000 being displaced immediately after the disaster. The vulnerable being your single-headed female households, as well as those with elderly and the people living with disability. The thing to point out here is, in terms of the affected houses, there's more numbers with the semi-permanent and traditional houses. And with the housing sector itself, total effects looking at 93, close to 94 million US dollars. Most of which is within the Sanma province. Now for housing priorities, recovery needs a value of 24 million USD, most of which is basically looking at recovery as related to durable building materials and tools to facilitate your more build back better recovery. Education sector, maybe I'll hand over to Owen.
Thank you very much. Again, we just want to provide some sectoral details. We know that some donor partners are more interested in some sectors, but of course we don't want to make this session very long, so we will try to go very quickly through all the sectors. So education, as we mentioned before, we are talking about 806 school facilities affected, and this includes different types of buildings: classrooms, the staff housing, dormitories, dinner halls, and different kind of support, especially books that were also affected. The Ministry of Education is covering these four different levels of education: early child, primary, secondary, and post-secondary education and training. The total effects, 7 billion Vanuatu, $64 million. You can see how mostly is about damages, which is affectations to infrastructure and assets, but there are also economic losses. Even though we are talking about a public sector, economic losses also accounts for all the additional expenditure to cost the response phase. So for example, all the school fees that were exempted, all the expenditure on specific assessments is included in here. So we're talking about 7.1 billion Vanuatu for education. And the recovery needs, as we mentioned before, 11 billion Vanuatu, $106 million. So these are the different programs that the Ministry of Education is putting in the recovery needs. Again, we need the final validation with DGs just to be sure that everything is included. But these are the main programs. We are talking not only about reconstruction. In contrast with PAM, one of the main critiques was recovery is just about reconstruction of infrastructure. In this case, something else. We are also trying to include different kind of programs to talk about human development, not only rebuilding. So these are the main programs. Please, we can come back to specific details. Any questions?
For the health sector, the findings being that we had reported 3 deaths, and then there's a number of injuries resulting from, say, building collapses or wind-blown debris. There's been reported increases in communicable diseases, respiratory infections or influenza-like illnesses or skin infections. The damage was mostly extensive at the health service delivery sector, and the report that there was 81 formal health facilities around the country that were impacted within those particular affected provinces. In terms of damage and loss, total effects of 2 billion Vanuatu and 19 million, close to 20 million US dollars. For recovery needs for the health sector alone, you're looking at 27 million US dollars. Most of which, if you look at what we've got here, is basically the rebuilding restoring the damaged health centers, especially, like say, with the Northern Provincial Hospital, as well as some figures more related to what Hoe alluded to earlier in terms of improving your governance or your institutional mechanisms to make health deliver much better. Cultural impacts and effects. Basically the reported damages to things like nakamas, churches, community halls, structures which represent a vital part, significant part of the cultural heritage, as well as identity of the affected communities, and as well as things, assets like traditional plants, say your pandanus or natangura tree stocks, which the local communities would rely on to generate income or say for building architecture. For the housing sector alone, total effects of 3 million, close to $4 million US, mostly churches and nakamas in terms of damages or effects. Now, what's been identified for recovery needs, total for that particular sector is 4.6 million US, and a lot is more about the repair and rebuilding of things like nakamas. For agriculture, livestock, I'll leave it to Hoe.
Thank you, Malcolm. Well, I think we mentioned this. We have used agriculture as an example. I think we can go a little bit quickly with this one. We have 4 subsectors: agriculture, livestock, forestry, and fisheries. Most of the effects are in the agriculture sector because, as we explained before, it's mostly about damage to crops. And these crops can be like long-term crops, especially kava. For kava, we're talking, for example, about 13 billion batu in economic losses. We have also the disaggregation of the affected provinces. I like a lot of sentence made by the Minister of Agriculture. They said, probably TC Harold followed the worst possible path in terms of the productive sector, affecting the biggest island, and also in terms of environment and in terms of the crop production. This is very interesting, the different recovery needs. What the Ministry of Agriculture is presenting is a proposal or changing the way in which the produce is made in Vanuatu. To think about avoiding import of food as rice, tin, tuna. Vanuatu has the resources, but the production is not enough even to cover this kind of caloric needs. So we're including, for example, or the Ministry of Agriculture is including research and development, training, encourage scale-up and sustainable fishing. So there are specific projects. Again, it's not about paid back farmers alone. It's about thinking about expanding this sector. For together commerce, trade, industry, cooperatives, and tourism, as in the Ministry of Trade. Is very related to agriculture, of course. We have 4 subsectors, and the Ministry of Trade also includes some sort of assessment for employment. We don't have a separate chapter of employment and livelihoods, but there are some estimates made by the Ministry of Trade. It's important to emphasize the COVID losses, 7.6 billion batu, but it's very important to say that this corresponds only for the period March-June, only 4 months. Why? mainly because the situation has been constantly changing. The situation now is not the same as in March, as in June, and it's not going to be the same in October. So it's very difficult to evaluate. We would have the need to be constantly evaluating and constantly in contact with the stakeholders to understand what is the context of this sector. So the Ministry of Trade decided just to keep it for 4 months. This is just a snapshot, but this is definitely underestimated. The COVID losses for the private sector is definitely bigger than 7.6 billion baht. The Ministry of Trade has preferred to be conservative, to be as accurate as possible, but stop for the period March-June. They are also presenting an interesting set of projects, even considering, for example, enhanced employment security, talking about employment preservations and rehabilitation. So the recovery strategy is very broad. Again, it's not only about reconstruction. The total recovery needs for this sector, 1.5 billion baht. Again, if we compare the total effects, is almost 10 billion baht. The recovery needs 1.5. Why? Because we are talking mostly about private sector. Again, it's not about just providing back a subsidy. It's about enhancing the capacity of these sectors.
For public buildings, what they've put here, basically the immediate recovery objectives and long-term recovery objectives, the debris removal, safe disposal, especially for some of the old buildings with asbestos cement, the temporary shelters for especially government buildings located in the provincial centers, and the restoration and the improvement of buildings using the Build Back Better. They've assessed 73 public assets as being affected. Total effects of 408 million baht, close, and that's translates to close to $4 million. Most of which, as you can see, is within the Sanma province. With total recovery needs, they've reported 481 million baht, and 4 million, close to $4.3 million. For transport, basically most that's been reported is more with land transport, as well as, say, on Pentecost, you had South Pentecost roads that you had significant sections that were washed away. The international wharf as well in Luganville, that sustained damage, and as well as damage to the international airport in Pekoa. And I've mentioned that land transport, especially out of the transport total effects, had more the substantial share of the total effects. Overall, 3 billion baht, or $29 million. And then a breakdown with the provinces, and basically it's more Sanma reporting more having the more, I would say, lion's share of the impacts or effects. Priorities, what they've put here mostly is related to, say, like South Santa Road, 11 million, close to $12 million, as well as the Pentecost, South Pentecost Road, total of 32 million in terms of identified recovery needs. Wash, mostly 76% of households, rainwater harvesting systems that were damaged, with 40% of impacted households, especially when we talk about sanitation systems. Very quickly, total effects, reported here is 21 million US dollars. We've got, like say, the private households, especially with rainwater harvesting, a lot reported with the effects on private rainwater harvesting, as well as sanitation, which features significantly, as well as wash facilities in schools. For wash priorities, identified recovery needs, this is more in Vanuatu, no US dollars figures, but for Vanuatu overall, especially for long term, 309 million Vanuatu, more in the short term, especially if you're looking at the restoration or rehabilitation of damaged water systems. That features very much significantly, especially for short-term recovery needs. Energy.
Thank you, Malcolm. This is also a private sector. The PDNA has some limitations, and one important limitation is the access to information to some specific firms. This is the case. It wasn't easy to have access to the information of losses, for example, to VUI, the electricity company in Santo, gasoline companies. So this is just an approximation according to the estimates made by the Department of Energy. Origin, for example, reported 20% revenue decrease in Santo, 40% decrease in liquefied petroleum gas, and this less the figures. The total effects, again, this is an underestimation, is around 178 million, which is around $1.6 million. The recovery needs are more related to the rehabilitation of the infrastructure. That doesn't mean that the government is funding these kind of activities, but as any recovery needs, we are including it. Is the money required to be able to rehabilitate some specific infrastructure, make electricity. So we're talking about 810 million Vanuatu. Energy and telecommunications is more or less the same story. We have the private companies, and at the same time OGCIO, which also have damage to its infrastructure and also incurred in economic losses. And we can see more or less what is the distribution in terms of the province. The total effects, 1.4 billion Vanuatu, $13 million, and we are, in this case, for example, considering, again, not only reconstruction. There is, for example, the National Emergency Telecommunication Plan. It is necessary to create this kind of institutional strength for future disasters. Recovery needs are 1.2 billion Vanuatu, in US dollars, $13.9 million. Environment, we also mentioned this sector before. If we look at the damages and losses, we are talking about 1.5 trillion Vanuatu. So the affectations to the environment is huge. In this case, it's a different methodology with respect to the rest of the chapters. What the Department of Environment is doing is just following academic literature to see what are the assumptions. What is the cost of every hectare, for example, of tropical forest? What is the cost of the mangrove? What are the economic losses for mangrove affectations, for example? So that's why it's so big, the affectations to the environment, 1.4 trillion Vanuatu. If we go to the recovery needs, this is just a summary. You will see in the PDNA volume B a detailed list of sectoral interventions, but it's about institutional strengthening, community management, working with the communities, generating of policies. For example, there is no national environment accounts. And in a country of Vanuatu, with these very deep roots environment, it is necessary to do this. The total recovery needs, 1 billion baht, around 8 million US dollars.
Justice Community Services, basically their recovery objectives relate to the restoration of essential social services, addressing issues such as gender-based violence protection and child protection issues, of which aggravated and exacerbated during times of disasters. The protection risk, especially related to COVID-19, and then leveraging your opportunities to promote gender equality and social inclusion. And in particular, the underrepresented groups at each community level when we go through the various recovery phases. Impacts and effects, what they've reported here is that, especially with economic activities, handicraft sector vendors, 88% women, open air vendors, which account for 96%. The domestic or caring activities by which women undertake, especially 90% care to people living with disabilities. And then the issues with accessibility with people living with disabilities for water, food, telecommunications, and the indications that gender-based violence or child abuse, sexual reproductive health may have increased given the reduced capacities of authorities to being stretched and having to address other disaster-related priorities or urgent issues. In terms of recovery needs, we haven't put here the actual effects as Hoe reported earlier. It's very much similar to environment. It's treated separately, given that it skews the whole results. I think it's more basically the non-economic nature of those particular sectors. Now, in terms of recovery costs, basically 2 billion baht, 20 million, 665 million dollars, most of which, if you look over here, it's addressing the issues of gender-based violence as well as disability inclusion aspects as well. Just to reiterate and go with you the overview of recovery needs, as we've mentioned earlier, overall recovery needs 36 billion baht, 330 million US dollars in terms of identified recovery needs from the sectors. As we've mentioned, this will be validated by the sectors before we release the finalized documents for your perusal. Recovery needs, again, just the share of how it looks, 49% with the social sector, 18% with the productive sector, 23% with the infrastructure sector, and then the rest, 10% with the cross-cutting sector. It's important to stress that recovery will require a multi-sectoral programmatic approach, a balanced approach, and it'll require sustained support as we move forward, especially with guidance from Prime Minister's Office through DESPAC and critical key central coordinating agencies like Ministry of Finance. Thank you, Thomas, for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Thomas Malcolm, with the Mahoke law presentation this morning. Excellencies, Director General, not presence of Director General of Finance, thank you for joining in. We should give credits to Malcolm, OK, and the three staffs at the back, Mark Pepe, Mark, and then the chef. So they are the ones who walk around the clock to put together PDNA and a recovery strategy. So we should aim to finish here by 12. So now it's 19 minutes past 11. So we have plenty of times for Q&A. Suppose you got questions or queries about the documents here. We have a recovery strategy and PDNA. So we will open up the floor. So feel free to ask more questions, or if you want to seek clarifications, you feel free to ask them, and we have a team here to respond to all questions for you. Thank you. Scott. Scott, you got one hand behind.
Thank you, DG.
So I think we should use the mic. I think these systems are not connected to the live stream.
Thank you, DG. Thank you, Malcolm and DISPAC for that. Just a question on the overview of recovery needs, Malcolm. The normal, ongoing, recurrent construction and reconstruction costs are not segregated out from recovery at all?
Can you question?
So just on ongoing,
no disaggregation.
So ongoing government recurrent budget, development budget, construction and reconstruction that is in the pipeline, as opposed to these specific recovery need figures, is that something that has been segregated or not yet?
Yeah, thanks for the question. That's a very critical question. We have yet to go along the lines. We did liaise with our finance colleagues, although we'll be having a more detailed discussion on Friday. So then we'll be able to go more along this particular information gap that is still to be addressed, especially I understand in terms of what government has in terms of budgetary commitments with recovery, and then what is basically unmet. Yeah.
If I may, just to complement the response, that's why Director Lapi presented in the morning the budget policy priorities. That's the relationship between the session in the morning and this one. So there are a budget allocation, and right now we have also to follow the government procedures. The budget for 2020 was almost finished for the response phase. There are specific allocations for next year budget. The new policy priorities were submitted last Friday. DG Finance can correct me if I am wrong. So the submissions were done, but we don't have yet a proper figure confirmed. It has to go to the MBC, Ministerial Budget Committee. So we are not in position yet to offer a specific value of the government expenditure out of this 36 billion baht. Every sector is different. We have, for example, funding confirmed from EDF 11 for the productive sectors. But of course, we also need to hear from you. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for this presentation. I have few questions. First, a very simple one. In terms of the recovery needs, you don't take into account the running of the social services. It's just, for instance, immunization costs that are running costs are not part of these things, of these recovery needs. That's my first question. My second question is on practically how to assist. In the previous presentation, you mentioned on the next steps, donor discussion and funding negotiation to be completed before the 1st of September for the MBC. How are you planning to organize that, to be able practically to talk together? Will it be per sector, per one of the 7 priority, per sectoral recovery needs? Because it's maybe a bit difficult for us as a UN agency to dissociate the support to the recovery needs to the usual support that we are providing to the different sectors. So that we need to, because we are currently in discussion with the line ministries to establish the 2021 work plan, the ministry business plan. So.
Eric, I'll answer the second question. I think that questions when we have bilateral discussions, then we can discuss how we will go about it. So I think I'll give to Malcolm to answer the first one. But I mean, your questions when we have the bilateral discussions together with the UN agencies. And then we can flesh out the details on how you can respond better to the recovery strategy. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, thanks very much. In terms of how we've reflected, if I understand your question, social services, this is basically just a reflection on what sectors have provided to us. There is certain references which might cover what you're referring to, like say with health, they've got recovery needs in terms of your health service delivery, something like that. So that's there. You'll be able to look at that more in depth when we provide the PDNA report. But yes, definitely it's in there, and try to as much as possible to and report back on what like health or education has provided to us. Do you want to?
Just to mention, like if something is not here, it means that it's part of the recurrent budget, the normal development activities of the ministries. So it has been a decision of each ministry. There was a common decision about reprioritization of budget resources. So the ministries have the choice to put their specific needs into recovery or normal development budget. So in this case, the Ministry of Health decided to continue this kind of social services provision within a development budget. So in this case, that's why it's very important the bilateral meetings, and of course considering the specific sectors for this kind of particular details.
Sue. Yes.
Hi. Thanks very much. I just want to say congratulations on bringing us all together today. This has been really, really beneficial. You've done incredible amount of work and incredible amount of analysis that you've brought to us here. So thank you very much for that. This has been a huge year with, elections earlier on in the year, and then COVID, and then TC Harold, and where we've got to at this point in time, I think is really a positive place to be. There's obviously a lot more work that we need to do together. We look forward to cooperating with other development partners. That was a very resound message from the Prime Minister that we all received this morning. We will be working obviously bilaterally with other donor partners to work out where we can support the government of Vanuatu, and obviously liaising through our sector partners within the government of Vanuatu as well, so that we can work to our comparative advantage and not overlap the support that we're providing. So there's a lot more work to be done around that, and we'll continue to engage with everybody in this room and everybody live streaming as well to ensure that we can divide up the responsibilities and support the government of Vanuatu as best we can. A few things just on my mind at the moment. One is, and this sort of draws on the lessons that we found as Australia after the Cyclone Pam recovery program. One of the things that we'll be thinking about is how we can best work to our comparative advantage. So potentially not working in every space, but really focusing our support where we can make the most impact. Another lesson was, thinking about the modalities that we use, and we certainly heard that message from the Prime Minister as well this morning about working through government systems. One of the lessons we learned is certainly that's such a strength to be able to work through government systems and build the capacity of government, and also local contractors, where we use local contractors as well. So we'll certainly be looking towards that mechanism, but then keeping our minds open to using a range of modalities too. And then finally, one of the other things on my mind at the moment, and once again a lesson from our TC-PAM recovery program, was having appropriate resources in place. And obviously that's about having the right capacity within government, whether that's in PMUs or asset management systems, to be able to implement the government's recovery plan, but then also, for us to be providing, the right project staff or technical advisory support to make that happen too. That's very much on my mind at the moment in this COVID environment. So we'll continue to work with you on that to ensure that we've got the right people in the right places so that we can work together to achieve really good outcomes. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Yes, I think for those of us who were here during the TCPAM, we have a lot of experience to learn, even the Ambai evacuation recovery. I mean, we have a lot of lessons to learn there. And when we come and engage in a bilateral discussions, this is where we down the to respond to the recovery for DCRO and COVID-19. Any more questions and queries? If there is no further questions, comments, we assume that every information we provided today is clear. You don't got any comments or questions? You mean look back? I mean, this is the only opportunity. We want to make sure that everyone understand our priorities and what we intend to do. Yeah, so that when we walk away from this room, we are on the same page. As a partners, it's very important to understand each other so that we can move together. Yes, Nick.
Thank you, DG and the team, for an excellent presentation. Just a suggestion, because in September there'll be the budget hearings, so it might be good for the ministries to organize meetings with the donors on a sectoral basis. So, for example, Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Trade, in the next couple of weeks to sit down with the donors, so that when the presentation goes to the Ministry of Finance, it's comprehensive and clear. So that's just a suggestion for the line ministry DGs, so that when they present their budgets, they present a combined effort, so it shows how they intend to respond.
Definitely. I mean, that's should be a way forward. We will need to look at it after our bilateral discussions today. Any more further questions or comments from the floor, or anyone want to make any interventions? Don't be shy. Don't be afraid. It's a very informal discussions. There's no wrong and right. All we want to know is to make sure that everyone, understand each other, are on the same page, so that we can move together, as we hear from Prime Minister's remarks today. You know, we have to stop talking and writing, and we need to put things into actions. Okay. Yes, there's a...
Hi, thank you. My name's Jessie from International Organisation for Migration, for anyone who doesn't know me. And congratulations. Yes, this is a very good place to be at this time of year, given how hard it has been. I just was in two minds about saying something, but I think the thing that's on my mind the most is around coordination with the sectors. I think Eric has already tried to bring that up. There's clearly today a lot of coordination with DeshPack, and bringing this group of people together is very positive, but coordinating with the DGs of the different ministries and DeshPack at the same time with the different partners relevant to that sector is really challenging, and we're just finding it, you know, difficult on an ongoing basis. And bilateral discussions are useful and really important, but they've got limitations as well, especially when we want to make sure the partners are not going separately to the DGs on the same topic in the same week. And we're all doing our best to talk with one another all the time, but I think there is a role there around DeshPack and the DGs separately, sectorally, that would help everybody to kind of agree on the priorities, and even though they're here and reflected, the actual implementation of them and the real confirmation and validation of them. Especially, I've got in mind particularly cross-cutting issues like disaster risk management. That's a cross-cutting issue. It's going to fall between the gaps. It's much harder when it's not a clear ministry, a clear cluster to go to for coordination. So they're the key things on my mind. But yeah, thanks.
Thank you. I think, yes, we take note of that point, and that's a very encouraging point and a way forward. And you have at the back all the sector analysis for each sector. So I think from, as we finish from here, they have to work around the clock to make sure that, each sectors are on the same page before the budget presentations at the end of September. So that's we will work closely. I mean, finance, foreign affairs, and DeshPacks. We have to work around the clock to making sure we iron out any differences and making sure we bring everyone on board. And we have a budget that when it goes through the MPC, they will know, everyone is aligned with the recovery strategy. Eric.
Maybe just to follow on what Jessie mentioned, I mean, one suggestion that to complement the bilateral discussion that you suggest, and because the sectors may be a bit too many, I think the 7 priorities that were presented to us at the beginning this morning could be also an interesting structure of the coordination, having discussion for each different priority with a different actor involved in this one of these 7 priorities. Just a suggestion.
Thank you. So we take note of that point. I mean, we have two DGs here. I mean, myself and Director for Finance. We have all the sector analysts and expertise analysts who are listening. And we have to make sure we work closely with the sectors and our partners so that what goes before our leaders reflect the recovery needs and then also our efforts are complementary. Okay.
Thank you, DG. Just a very quick comment on that regard. The message that Director Lapi and DG Nimtik have been expressed to us is, please also allow us to help you and allow us to participate properly in the coordination. We have the experience, for example, of Ambae. Some specific development partners work with some sectors, and the National Recovery Committee, DeshPack, sometimes wasn't aware of this kind of cooperation. So please allow DeshPack to be part of of this. We have aid coordination, we have sector analysts, and we have the recovery unit. Happy to be part of these kind of meetings with you, with the sectors. So sometimes it's thought that the government, it's only one single organism where the communication is 100% clear. Sometimes it's not the case as any kind of government. So please allow DESPAC to be part of this conversation. And second, with the intervention by Eric, more than the budget policy priorities, because that's more oriented for the government, for the ministries, we have very clearly defined in the recovery strategy for every specific objective, the leaders and the specific ministries that have to be part of that. So probably our guideline is very clear in the Vanuatu recovery strategy. We have projects, we have recovery objectives, and we have agencies to lead and to implement. So maybe it's in there, we can follow that guidance in the strategy. Thank you.
Sí, ¿vale? ¿Tenemos el?
Thank you, DGPMO and everyone who are here. My apology. I was with the Minister of Finance attending the FEM ministerial meeting, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Thank you for the excellent presentation and the team that came up with this production. I know it is especially to get all this information. In terms of financing, I think the government has already came forward. The government has already pledged about 3 billion for the COVID-19 and TCRL reconstruction and recovery. And how that is going to be used to address what is presented here is we need to work very closely with the recovery team. That is basically what we will be doing going forward. In short, the government is already in front of this. Now the disbursement and everything will come in as soon as everything is ready. Thank you, DG.
UNDP?
Thank you. I think firstly, let me acknowledge the commitment from the government with these presentations and the analysis on this PDNA. I think just to acknowledge and to comment DESPAC and especially ROC team, Malcolm, Joe and the others who have been supporting this process, I know, and also I would like to comment all our development partners, UN agencies who have been also providing the technical support. UNDP is only coordinating, but we thank you all for the support for this process, which we have yet to finalize the PDNA, but the recovery strategy has been already finalized. UNDP is actually looking forward to support RUC. I think there's a way forward that we can actually collaborate to assist ROC, especially to strengthen the M&E framework as well, and how we can coordinate this with the development partners on moving the recovery work. Prime Minister has actually made it very plain, so now you know talk too much now. I think you must go move, let me walk by me, try best play me coordinate me fellow side development partners, how play me sabe make them walk and we go forward. There's more to be done, but firstly I think we want them tell them no more say thank you lo support more now we look him say capacity and stable country. So there's capacity within the government system, it's just strengthening that system that is in place. So for us I think there's we already saw that coming up from this PDNA, so we will continue to support that process way forward. And on behalf of our rep, Levan and Kevin, we would like to commend the Vanuatu government, respect him for the really tremendous job that is done with this process going forward with development partners. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, UNDP. Excellencies, I think if there is no further comments, it looks like we are almost close to our lunch. You may run your right, yeah? So you don't go away, be confused. We want to make sure that, everyone is happy and understood what we intended to communicate it to you this morning. So, again, the PDNA is not final. If you have any further comments that you want to make, write directly to the ROC teams, and they will be able to consider your comments. We are managed to finalize it by Malcolm. PDNA, yeah? Validation law. So validations on Wednesday next week, and after that we'll finalize it and distribute the comments the final copies to everyone. Is that, huh? So thank you. I think if there is no further comments or any interventions, I'll make my concluding remarks, and then we'll close our sessions with a prayer and also pray for lunch. No good, got lunch, but there's a lunch, so don't run away. So as a human being, you need lunch, yeah. Don't run away. So we're expecting to see everyone around the tables. But let me say a few words as a way forward. Firstly, let me thank everyone for making it this morning. It is a brief introductions, and we want to use this opportunity to share with you the outcomes of the recovery strategy and PDNA. And basically, that's the purpose. And also, we want to emphasize the need for coordinations. As we head around the table, we maybe within the partners, we have the coordination team there, but from the government side, we also to coordinate ourselves and coordinate with our partners, especially development partners, and also the member of civil society. So, as a way forward, from now on, the Department of the DESPAC, together with finance and foreign affairs, will organize individual bilateral discussions with our key partners in country to discuss how you would like to support the recovery strategy and government priorities in the next year onwards. So that will be an immediate actions from here. You will expect an email or letters from us requesting an appointment with you to work out the details and discussing more in details. Maybe you have some few queries, but you don't want to put it on the table now. But we will come around and meet you separately, and then we can nail down the details of how you would like to respond to the recovery strategy, complementing the efforts of the governments. And that's a way forward from now. And then we will have our MPC scheduled at the end of the September, and after the MPC concludes its business, we will call another technical meetings with all our partners again and to present to you the actual envelopes that we have towards the recovery strategy and government priorities for 2021. But let me conclude by acknowledging and expressing our utmost appreciation on behalf of the governments to you all for response to this role on COVID-19, and we look forward for that cooperation and partnership spirits to continue in the next future or in the future times ahead. So once again, thank you everyone. And this morning, having everyone around the table is a good sign. And I like to acknowledge that and thanking everyone for making it this morning. So without further ado, I think that the last point that I want to mention is, it's very important that we coordinate among ourselves to make sure that there is a harmonization of our resources. There is no duplications of our effort and resources. I think we learned from TC PAM and also by recovery. I think let's not repeat the mistakes that we made during the TC PAM and by recovery. So our intention now is to make sure that we dialogue, we working together and discuss things together and moving together so that our efforts are coordinated, we are not duplicating each other. And making sure that limited resources that we have, we share it equally with the sectors. The last but not the least is thanking those who are on the live stream. Thank you for joining us, and I hope the internet services are working well, so that you can be able to follow our discussions this morning. But let me take this opportunity to thank you all for joining us through the live stream. Thank you, everyone. You may back again, and you may hope you may work together in the next months where you come. Put them together details, when we start discussing, and then you may move forward. I hope it will not be another thick documents. Also, Prime Minister tells you must stop right now. You need to move into the implementation phase, recovery. I also noted that there's a lot of things happening out there, but we need to coordinate on how we report things and inform our leaders of one where you must make them on the grounds. Without further ado, thank you everyone. By God bless you, everyone. Let's close our eyes where we are, and I'll ask Director Despak by closing me with them one prayer, with more prayer with them from Kakaitu.
Thank you. Close my eyes, please. Pray eternal court, our Father which art in heaven. Maybe I want them tell them thank you to you, lo opportunity where you stop with them if throughout morning session, maybe like this morning. Maybe I pray that by you stop with them, maybe ready now, blow finish from this place. Maybe I continue blow ask him guidance, please you blow stop with them, maybe. It may difficult blow maybe you work together, low one environment where maybe sometimes me so small. And maybe try to squeeze all priorities, maybe come together, me little bit hard, maybe move around low space, but maybe ask him to find guidance, wisdom from above, you guide them, maybe work together and work effectively. Maybe ready now, dismiss, discussion, maybe got all kakai stop, maybe pray that by blessing play you stop lehem. Talk about sickness lambs, maybe take him himself strength and body, maybe continue, to him walk here. Thank you, Lord, and pray, maybe stop with him, throughout day to day, name Jesus, maybe stop offering prayer. Amen.